Well, welcome everybody. And it's Benedictus and Benevidas. Now you've just heard the most embarrassing, humiliating thing that my Spanish speaking is nada, but my passion is enormous for this work. So welcome everybody. We have a very packed agenda tonight. We've got 3 terrific speakers who are going to give you different perspectives on what we need to do and how we need to connect with the Latino community across North Carolina, which may well be the telling of whether we can preserve the governor's veto and maintain the courts as they are today. I just want to say, I think you all know, but if there's people who are coming in, I just want to say a really quick word about County to County itself. We are an informal part of the Orange County Orange County Democratic Party. And in many ways, we are unusual in that we focus not on Orange County, our home county, which is blue and pretty rich in resources, but rather in other counties with many fewer resources and with electable candidates that we can support. And we've heard a lot in the last couple of months from all of the out-of-state organizations that we're working with now, that they have never seen another county with the same model as county to county. So it's beginning to the word is beginning to spread. We're beginning to get recognition. It's very exciting to have the kind of quality out-of-state support we're getting, as well as, I think, some mounting interest throughout North Carolina. Just a couple of rules for tonight. We have 3 terrific speakers. We're going to try and contain everybody's comments to 10 minutes each. I'm from New England and known for being blunt in my suggestions of cutting it short when the time exceeds your limit, but I will try and be careful about that. And then toward the end, after the 3 speakers, Eleazar will be moderating a whole section on questions and answers, and then I'll just finish up with some briefs. So I think we could really begin now with Eleazar, and I'm just so delighted to introduce somebody. If you haven't met Eleazar, you will, I feel sure. He's an amazingly wonderful person who has demonstrated such leadership throughout North Carolina in terms of working with grassroots organizations and nonprofit organizations on issues such as improving strategic impact, on program development, on how to raise money, on how to advocate effectively. He's also been a huge friend of County to County and one of our most special advisors in shaping the outreach program for 2022. Eleazar is a graduate of Campbell University, and I should also say he's also a candidate for Carrboro Town Council. Listen up, everybody, very exciting. So Eleazar is going to talk about some of the issues that we need to know and to listen to if we are basically to reach out effectively to our Latino communities throughout North Carolina. Thank you, Eleazar.
Buenas noches, good evening.
You're going to train me on the, yes, train me again.
We'll get you there, Buenas noches. Kay, thank you so much for those amazing and so kind words. As Kay already said, I'm Eleazar Posada. I want to talk to you a little bit about where our Latinx community stands today, right? Through my work with nonprofits, a big portion of what I had to do was reach out to community and understand what the needs are. I had the pleasure of working with not just county to county, but so many other beautiful leaders across the state in reaching folks and understanding where priorities lie, and also understanding the landscape of where outreach for Latinos truly is, right? And where it stands when we're talking about this democratic process. First, let's be blunt about it. Latino outreach is not where it needs to be, by far. We need to improve that a huge amount, and we really want to engage Latinos in elections. As of now, the Latino population is a significant portion of our electoral or our voting population here in North Carolina, but are not really being outreached as so, right? It is not uncommon for many folks in the Latino community to never receive a flyer, to never receive a phone call, to never get an invitation for a meet and greet. And that is detrimental, not just to the process of democracy, but also to Democrats, right? If you want to get folks to turn out, you have to do the work to get them to understand where your message is and why it's important for them to support you. And that's been a lot of the work that I've done throughout my years in registering Latinos and getting folks involved in the electoral process and understanding and getting folks the information they need when it comes to the where to register, where to go vote, what are the issues on the platforms of various candidates. And I had the honor of working with a national organization called Unidos US, previously known as National Council of La Raza, to do an evaluation of where our Latino voters are here in the state. What really matters, right? Because there's this idea that many of our community members or Latino members care a lot about immigration, and that's kind of like a gatekeeping issue for many of our community members, and that's just flat out wrong, right? We did a survey and we talked to hundreds of Latinos across the state. And what consistently came up for folks, right? Healthcare is the very top of the priority list. And it makes no one is surprised by this, right? We know with the pandemic being what it was, it impacted Latinos disproportionately amount of cases were Latino cases. We saw many of our community members in the front lines being dramatically more affected than other folks who were able to stay home. So it's no surprise that the very top of the priority list is healthcare. Then we have jobs and economy. This is talking about, again, folks being dramatically affected by the pandemic, losing jobs, not being underpaid or underemployed, as well as very many barriers to achieving higher economic status, right? Third in that survey, we saw discrimination and social justice. Again, nothing surprising on that, knowing of everything that happened throughout the pandemic. We also saw the conversation around racial and social justice really elevate to the top of many discussion boards, right? Talking about not just what was happening with the Black Lives Matter movement, but also highlighting with this previous administration how much we have not moved forward when it comes to racial equity. Education and immigration reform are the other, the fourth and fifth topics that we saw at the very top of those priorities. So immigration is still is a big issue, but keep in mind that before many voters specifically are dealing with immigration, they're looking at healthcare, they're looking at jobs and economy, they're looking at discrimination and education, right? And why do I mention this? Because of the fact that as we move forward and as we have the conversation tonight about making strategies and making sure that we're reaching out to our community, we have to reach out to our community in the things that matter to them. Like any voter, right? You reach out by letting them know where you stand on these issues that are important to them. And there's no silver bullet. Let me just say that right now. There's no silver bullet that says, if you talk about this one issue, you're gonna get all the Latinos to vote for you, because that's never gonna happen. A prime example of how diverse our community is, Latino community is, let's talk about the fact that over 50% of Cuban Americans in North Carolina voted Republican. Let's talk about, based on our survey, about 30% of Puerto Ricans voted Republican. Let's talk about the fact that there is many outreach methods that the Republicans have used that the Democrats have not, like putting jingles in local radio stations that push them to subconsciously vote for someone in the Republican Party, right? And then also the fact that the Republicans have actually adhered to what we've been saying for forever. Reach out, talk to folks, make sure that they know that you're there. Unfortunately, Democrats have not been as active as Republicans as have been in the South. So I want to make sure that we move that forward. I want to make sure that as we move into this midterm election, as we move to get, of course, Representative Ricky Hurtado reelected and so many other Democrats to the General Assembly, we're reaching out to folks with the topics that matter to them and not simply thinking because they're Latinos, they're going to vote Democrat, because it's not going to happen. Now, part of my role tonight is to make sure that y'all know that county to county is extremely important. I joined County to County and been working it because I believe in the mission of reaching every voter, of reaching the communities that have not been serviced in the past by candidates or by the party. And as you might be able to tell, I get a little passionate when I talk about these kind of issues because that's my work. That's what we need to be doing every single day, not on the presidential cycle, not on the midterms, but every day we need to be actively thinking of how do we engage community, how do we bring people into the fold. And volunteering with County to County is a prime way of doing that. That's how I've been working, or that's my mission behind working with County to County. And of course, you'll learn more about me and we'll talk more later in the Q&A section. But for now, I'll leave it there because sometimes I ramble a little bit. So thank you all for being here. Please, 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 if you don't know anything or learn anything or leave anything from me for my discussion is volunteer. Let's reach all of our Latino voters.
Fantastic, Eleazar. That was really, really terrific. And very, very interesting on the 4 areas that we really focus on and how one of the questions should really be for all of us. How do we weave those into the scripts that sometimes are not as responsive or as focused on the right issues as we know them to be, both in phone banking and in canvassing. So our next speaker is Dr. Jennifer Bremer, and we're really pleased to have her here. Dr. Bremer is a policy analyst, a researcher, and an economist. She spent over 40 years in government reform and private enterprise, as well as international development in over 30 countries. She's divided her career between academia and professional roles leading organizations, again in international development, including 2 public policy centers in Washington and Cairo, which could not be more timely, I think, in terms of what is happening in the world today. Since her retirement in 2016, Jennifer has really become one of the very top experts in redistricting in North Carolina. So we're very lucky to have her here, and hope maybe she'll mention that as well as some of the issues around demographics. She has degrees from Harvard, Stanford, and Barnard College. So great, distinguished, and hope everybody will welcome her here. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you very much. I'm actually going to begin by reading a little statement about my background and why I do this work, because what we're trying to do, as you can probably guess, is really motivate people to get involved. So I thought I would talk a little bit about how I got involved and try to keep it pretty short, because I've actually been a volunteer with County to County from the very first meeting in December 2016, when it came together after, of course, the Trump election. And that was even before I joined the League of Women Voters, which I've also been very active in, which was in January of 2017. And I'm not representing the League here at all, but I just want to say that so why did I get involved, and in particular, why did I join the League, for example? And that was really to honor my mother, who was a Leaguer. But even before that, I am the granddaughter of a Ukrainian Jew who stood up against the Tsarist government in the early 1900s and then had to flee to the US. And I spent my career working in international development, mostly in countries that are not even close to being democracies, such as Egypt or Indonesia, Philippines, what have you. So at Mexico, before there was much in the way of reform. So I have a really deep sense of what it means not to have a democracy. And when I was living in Egypt and teaching governance to Egyptian graduate students, what should happen but the Tahrir Revolution, which was followed by their first ever democratic presidential election. But about a year later, you could just tell it became evident that the local oligarchs were systematically undermining the new government. And I concluded that a coup was coming. And so I left Egypt at the end of the 2013 academic year. And the coup happened a week later. And more than 1,000 people were gunned down in Cairo in a single day, people who were protesting the coup. And we haven't reached that point yet. And I hope that we never will. But we all have to do what we can to shore up our democracy, which has never been the perfect union that we learned about in school, but it now faces serious and rising threats. So that's why I do what I do. And I hope that all of you will join me. And many of you are already working in these areas. I know many of you, not just by attending webinars, but by marching, phone banking, canvassing, registering people to vote, and really doing whatever you can and working with whatever group or groups you choose to work with. I'm not here as a representative of the League at all, which is strictly nonpartisan. And this is, of course, a partisan event. I'm not even a capital D Democrat, since I'm actually registered unaffiliated. And I'm here as someone who cares about our democracy and recognizes that for the first time in my lifetime, it's under very real threat. And it could even be lost. And I hope that everyone will, not only who's here will join, but reach out to your friends and get them involved. We always say every election is important, but this election is
Really
in
is.
some ways is more important than any other. So with that, let me turn to what I'm supposed to be
Thank
talking
you.
about, and see if I can share my screen. Go back over here, share screen, blank. Back up to the start of this. Okay, so present. You can do it, computer. Maybe. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to talk about building on what Eleazar said about engaging Latinos in North America and North Carolina, and talking a little bit more about the community. I wanted to start with a roadmap. I always start with a roadmap and a disclaimer. The Latino community is growing very quickly in North Carolina, but it really hasn't yet gotten the degree of examination and study that it merits. So there's not as much solid information as one would like. But one thing is clear: it is very diverse by origin, where people live in the county, the family background, language, education, income, employment, all kinds of different issues. So it has to be, you can't just generalize too much about this community, recognizing that there is this inherent diversity. But I'm really 100% echoing what Eleazar said, that to me, the main thing is that attention must be paid. Latino voters, quite frankly, are up for grabs. They will not automatically support Democrats. And you can't assume that they are like other minorities, or that they're all alike with each other. That really, the engagement has to be carried forward to be able to really meet people where they are. And moreover, there's a whole range of organizations that have been established within the community to serve the needs, of the community, and these provide a lot of information and skills that really should not just be ignored at all, even though one has to be careful about the partisan and nonpartisan. They also need more support to mobilize and engage, not only because people have to be asked, everybody has to be asked, but because of some of the things in their history and their experiences in the U.S. And I think they're also, and I'm trying to figure out how to say this without getting myself in too much trouble, there's going to probably need to be some hard work on party unity, because the growth of the Latino community really presents, implies that there will have to be changes in the way the party operates. And that's not going to be necessarily like any change. It's probably not going to be that easy. But my bottom line is we cannot be like Texas. And by that, what I mean is that Dems were asleep at the switch in Texas, and they did not do the kind of work that Alessandra was talking about. And they just figured, oh, it's a question of turnout. And they showed up, a couple of weeks before the election or something. And the Republicans were laughing at them because they had been making systematic efforts to reach out for 2 years. And the result was, a very bad performance on the part of the Democrats along the Rio Grande in particular, which is a huge concentration of Latinos. So we do not need to repeat those mistakes. This is, I think, an interesting little graph, and never mind it doesn't have numbers on the side. It will gain some numbers in a minute. But this shows the distribution. This is 2017 ACS data, which is it's a census survey program, and it shows the voting eligible population and the non-citizen population. And you can see some important things about this. And you can see, that the large number of, much larger numbers of people on the sort of younger side of the scale, and then some of whom are non-citizens, but most of whom are citizens. And then as you get older, the percentage of citizens goes down. And you get more people who are non-citizens. Also, this is overall a young population in that there are very few older people, because people don't generally emigrate when they're older. It's just the way it is. People stay where they are. Although there are some people, and there's some people who've been there for a long time, and therefore are older. But this now we add the people who are under 18, almost all of whom are citizens. And this, as I say, is 27 data. So the first, 5 or so of those bars have already moved over into the voting eligible category. And, each of these, age cohorts is tens of thousands of people. This is a large population. And increasingly, as it continues, to move, into the voting age, and with additional kids coming up behind, it's going to become a larger and larger share of our voters. Also, it's a somewhat geographically concentrated population. It's along the infamous 85 Arch, with kind of an extension down into particularly the agricultural areas in the east, Sampson and Duplin. There's a lot of chicken plants and so forth. But the biggest concentrations are Wake and Mecklenburg, followed by some of the other major urban counties. And I put little plus signs there on the county to county counties, selected high priority counties. And you can see that some of those are a really good match and some of them are not. So there are places like Nash that have a very low Latino population. And there are places like Wake or Guilford or Alamance, of course, that have or Cabarrus, that have a very large Latino population. So it's not a one size fits all picture. Some key facts and figures, and overall about half of adult Latinos in North Carolina are eligible to vote. And 61% of the North Carolina Latinos are US born. It's not the case that these are all immigrants. The 60% are born in the US. They come from very diverse backgrounds. Mexico is the leading country, with about a little bit more than half of the Hispanic population or the Latino population coming from Mexico. And Central America accounts for another quarter, particularly Honduras, Salvador, and Guatemala. And a big question mark for the future is whether the situation in Central America is going to lead to another large wave or continuing waves of immigration, and how those are going to be handled. And that's really a mystery. But I have to say that climate change and political issues, one can, I think, expect to see continuing flows of people wanting to get out of Dodge, because it's just unlivable and increasingly because of agriculture as well as politics. And this is just kind of I picked a couple of counties, Alamance and Cabarrus, and to really highlight the rapid growth in this population. This goes back to January 2004, and these are North Carolina Board of Election Statistics, which they thoughtfully publish every week. If you go from, I mean, in January '04 in Alamance, there were 87 registered Latino voters. Now there were five, sort of recently, there are 5,000. And in Cabarrus, there were 154, and now there's 6,000. So that's a 40-time increase in Cabarrus and a 60-time increase in Alamance. So this is just, there's just been a transformation in a relatively, in demographic terms, a relatively short period of time. And this is something that cannot be ignored. And I looked at Alamance voters by party and by Latino and non-Latino. And one of the things that I want to say is there's a problem in the data that you can sort of adjust for, but not really, which is that many people do not answer the Latino, non-Latino question. But I looked at one way of possibly getting around that. But these are based on who is officially a Latino, based on their declaration as such. And, the Latinos, are, so you can really see that the larger share is registered Democratic, but there are a lot of, in particular, unaffiliated, as well as a number of Republicans. So it's not a case that this population is all gonna vote Democrat by any stretch of the imagination. And you can see the large unknown there where people have not specified. And there's also a growing, population in the cities where, and here we have the major city in each of the county to county counties. It's kind of hard to say that. There's a limit to how many times you can say county. You can see quite, some degree of variation, but the voting age population is, in the, as low as say, 5% in Pitt, but up to, even as high as 23% in Lee, where you have a lot of agricultural work. And I've highlighted some of these counties because the Black population and the Latino population is very similar in size. This has really been a transformation over the period of this inflow of Latinos to reach this second very large minority group. Although it's not, that's not as true in these other counties, but still there is, this to me suggests some work that needs to be done in party unity, how we keep the things together. There are opportunities for reaching out and engaging the Latino population. There's a growing number, as Eleazar mentioned, of Latino organizations engaged in political work, but also social service and religious organizations. They place, other surveys have also shown they place a very high value on education and health services, and that confirmed as well in the data that Eleazar mentioned. And that also, I think, reflects not only does everybody care about these things, but also especially important to people who are relatively new in the country and are looking at how do we get ahead, because they can't get those services. That makes it very difficult for the family to advance. They also they generally support labor organizing, in part because of the traditions in their home countries, and are very interested in democracy. And there's some new coalitions that are relatively new. These aren't all that new necessarily, but these organizations that they have formed, as I mentioned, have now come together more in North Carolina in coalitions. El Colectivo, which is a general group of social and political organizations, the Congress of Latino Organizations, which is more church-related groups, and then a variety of local groups, Vínculo Hispano, El Pueblo, Centro Hispano, more than one centro that are not connected. So there's a lot of local groups to work with, most of which are nonpartisan. There are also challenges. One is the potential attractiveness of conservative values to this population. This is by and large a religious population, although they tend to be affiliated with more conservative religions. So Catholic is sort of the expectation, but that's not by any means the only religion. There are very large evangelical and Pentecostal groups within the Latino community as well. And this kind of adds up to, for example, an opposition to abortion among a significant group. Some surveys showing that younger people are shifting away from that to some extent. But nonetheless, this is a major issue and a major voting issue for a large share of the population. Surveys show that they place a high value on hard work and self-reliance, which may also encourage them to think more in the conservative direction and entrepreneurship. We're going to make it here. Or people who are already entrepreneurs, I made it, why can't everybody make it? Those same kinds of things that you see driving conservatism generally. They also, because of where they came from, that wasn't Puerto Rico, they lack a family tradition of political participation. I mean, being active in Guatemala is a really good way to get killed. People are very hesitant. And so they don't have that let's march to the polls kind of tradition. And they find the American government, I mean, who doesn't really, find it very confusing. I mean, there's all these weird positions and the elections are at different times with different offices. And what are these people doing? What is the clerk of the court? And why do I care? I mean, they just, there's a lot for them to learn. And if they came here as adults, and as opposed to coming up through the school system, they really need help in understanding this stuff, not only why it's important to them, but also just understanding how to think about these different races. And the Dems are really late to the party, and action is going to have to be taken because this people have to be asked, they have to be listened to, they have to be approached, and this is something which is, if it's not done, then it almost doesn't matter what else you do, because you're not going to get people on side. And as I mentioned, intergroup politics are something we may have to fool around with a little bit. So in conclusion, like I say, reach out, respect must be paid. And I think we have to be, not be too afraid of making mistakes. I have to say that in my experience of working in countries where I don't speak the language or whatever it is, very different cultures, that people understand if you're making an effort and if you're being genuine, even if you use the wrong word or you don't recognize that they've just told you something in a way that everyone else in the room understood and you didn't. There's tolerance for that if you're really, they can see that you're making an effort, and that's the only way you're going to learn. And it's important to lead with substance and social programming, old style organizing, providing services, providing benefits, and not just showing up for GOTV. And engage existing leaders and organizations who can help you, make those bridging moves and meet people where they are. And this is going to be a long-term commitment. This is something that's going to continue. We're going to see continuing immigration, as well as changes in the community. And it really is something that has to go on all the way year round. And you can listen and learn, and maybe learn some Spanish. It's it has the advantage over English in being a really logical language, where spelling is virtually guaranteed. So unlike English, so so why not learn some Spanish? And let's, bottom line, do not make the mistakes of the Texas Dems. We must engage year round, sincerely, and not just, we need you to vote for our candidate, but what can we do for you, and then actually do those things. So that is my presentation. I will now attempt to stop sharing. There we go.
Jennifer, that was so interesting and raises so many questions. I'm sort of tempted to come back and ask them now, but I think we'll delay them until we've heard from Ricky too, because looking across each speaker, they're starting to get some issues that are mutually reinforcing and questions that everybody really needs to think about and answer at the same time. So, wow, that was absolutely wonderful. I get very irritated when people say everybody knows such and such a person, because frequently I don't know who they are talking about. But I do think that almost everybody around North Carolina knows Ricky Hurtado as being one of our great leaders in the legislature, as a person who has demonstrated from the very beginning an enormous commitment to children and families to public education to community organizations that he has joined, and he's on so many boards and activities. And for C2C, he has taught us so much. We've learned so much, and we really do love him as our, I shouldn't say this, but I'll say one of our most favorite legislators. So I just thank you so much for coming, Ricky. And we really want to hear more from you about your take on what's been said so far, and also maybe pulling in some of the points that Jennifer made, particularly about Alamance County. That was very interesting, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Kay, don't worry. We'll cut out that part of the recording where you called me your favorite. All right. So, but thank y'all
I'll
so
put it in writing, sort of.
Thank y'all so much for participating in tonight's discussion. We've already received a lot of really rich information from one of the best in Elie Assad, who has been organizing our community for years now, and Jennifer for such great information. My campaign was really a case study of putting both of those things into practice, understanding the demographics of our community and understanding that we could not afford to leave any votes behind. And so C2C was critical in making sure that didn't happen. And I'll get into some of the strategies in a second, but really important to understand a lot of the issues and values that we're talking about. I'm realizing now when you think about it through, I guess, an academic lens, and sort of begin to dissect the research a bit on how this makes sense. For me, it was sort of lived experience of growing up as a son of immigrants, and around the kitchen table with my parents, where a lot of this was really apparent, right? And I'll lift up one thing around what Elie Assad was sharing around the issues, right? What are the issues that continue to come up for Latino students and or voters and constituents and immigrant families across North Carolina? And it is absolutely true that issues like education and healthcare always rise to the top of the list when it comes to issues that are impacting families, right? I mean, the whole concept of our public education system is intertwined with immigrant families' concept of the American dream and why they're even here to begin with. It is one of the first reasons that decided as to why so many families made a sacrifice to move, not just to the United States, but to a place like North Carolina, right? They wanted good schools for their kids. And so that is a conversation I have with many, many families across the state. And healthcare is where as well, when you talk about the highest uninsured rate in our community, you talk to any child of immigrants and they know the struggles of what it means to have an uninsured parent and the burden that leaves on intergenerational sort of mobility, right? I think about my parents' retirement and their insurance and what that means for the future. And you know, I don't have it as difficult as some when we think about young people who are coming of age in North Carolina, trying to make it by and sort of take their own little slice of the American dream, but at the same time, worry about their uninsured parents within their retirement because they may be undocumented or face a number of other barriers due to their immigration status. And so those are real challenges that are facing real people here in North Carolina that I think we all need to take into consideration. The immigration question for in terms of an issue, still very much, as Elias had pointed out, a prominent issue in the community. But what I've learned as well is that it's been, and it's also been backed up by some research, that it's been the immigration sort of narrative and issue has almost translated away from policy and more to a value. And so we saw shifts in the Latino voting bloc between 2016, 2018, and 2020, when immigration was being used as a dog whistle and we were getting really nasty rhetoric at the national level from our former president. That sent a huge signal that we were not wanted here and we did not belong here. So even when there might be some agreement on economic or, you know, more conservative causes, they just could never see themselves voting for someone like that, right? It was a little different in 2020, right? I think we would have seen something similar because people were really prepared to see immigration as a top issue on every commercial but COVID really changed dynamics and how we campaigned. And all of a sudden, it was a COVID election. And so immigration really fell to the bottom of the list. And that sort of became less of a worry in terms of what people were hearing, but still certainly in the sort of political ecosystem in terms of something that I think it's really important for us to signal in terms of where our values are and what policy means in combination with all the other things, right? And so certainly very much a part of so many people's stories here in North Carolina. But y'all didn't ask me to come here to give you all my thoughts on academic research here. But I do want to share, I just wanted to sort of share that piece, but did want to share how that came to really come to fruition here in Alamance County. It is a county that is a 50-50 county, a 50-50 district. It's not a 50-50 county, it's a 50-50 district when it comes to the challenges to campaigning and what it means to make sure we reach out to every single voter in this district. And so we looked at the data in the same way that Jennifer did, and we connected with organizers on the ground. And the reality is that I won my election by 477 votes. And that does not happen without C2C volunteers. That doesn't happen with boots on the ground. We were one of the few campaigns who thought we could not afford to not canvass during COVID. We did it safely. We social distanced, we wore masks. But a lot of people, a lot of young people in particular, were in the field, knocking on doors, talking to folks in the grocery store, wherever. It was the first time we've had that sort of engagement in the Latino community ever in North Carolina, I would dare to say. I was the only candidate that had a Spanish-speaking digital ad that we pushed out via Facebook and Instagram to make sure that we were pushing the same message as other folks in our district. And all those strategies helped in making sure that people were seeing that there was someone fighting for them as well, that they were a part of this conversation. And to the earlier points around issues that matter, we weren't talking about immigration. In these ads, we were talking about public education. We were talking about expanding Medicaid. We were talking about economic prosperity for working families, right? And I think all those messages are messages that very much resonate with our families when they reach them. And so the part that I love about this C2C initiative and just the work of C2C in general is that you understand that it takes more than one election cycle, right? There were a lot of voters that we may have spoken to in 2020 that maybe didn't vote in 2020, but now we've hit them in 2019, 2020. We went back out to talk to them in 2021, and now we're talking to them again in 2022. And so by the time we reach them this 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th time, they're saying, oh, I know this guy. This is the guy that won't leave me alone. These are volunteers that want to talk politics, right? And there's some trust being built in this process. And I think that's what it's going to take. I think a message that we can all take away from today that I think we can take away most weeks is don't be like Texas, right? But that definitely in this respect, when it comes to engaging the Latino community, I've learned in my short time in politics that campaigns are really short-sighted and they are thinking about the now, right? They need, and I understand it, right? There's limited resources and limited time, and we have to figure out how we're going to win in November. But I think it's C2C job, not just to think about November 2022, but also November 2024 and 2026. And each one of these are building blocks when it comes to continued engagement. You saw the demographic shifts in places like Cabarrus and Alamance County. And I think a lot of you were also part of the conversation when we thought about the countrypolitan regions in our state, right? And those overlap. And so when you think about red counties with growing Latino communities, this could be the critical factor that allows us to win these 50-50, 52, 48 races that begins to tip the scales in North Carolina. It's just, we just face the question as a community and as a party, are we willing to put in the time and effort to see a return on investment, not just in year 1, but also in year 10? And so I hope that y'all continue to rally folks in your community, donate to organizations that are doing this work on the ground, continue to invest in leaders like Eliasad that are doing incredible work, continue to canvass and support campaigns where they're Latino elected officials right next door, of course, to you. Yeah, continue to have this conversation, because I think this is the only way that we begin to change hearts and minds, not just on the outside, but also within the Democratic Party, where we have to make it clear now that, as we've seen with some of the gains in this community in 2020, that these votes are up for grabs. And if we don't grab them, we're going to lose them. And so I've said this to many media outlets and to many people. I don't shy away from that message. It's the party that builds a stronger multiracial coalition in this decade is going to maintain power. We just have to be the ones that get there first, because Republicans also can't afford not to reach out to Latino voters. And they know that, because there's been quite a few Republican organizations that have sprouted up across North Carolina. Coincidentally, I don't know if there's a correlation, a lot of these leaders all of a sudden popping up in my county too. But it's interesting to see, right, that they're also thinking about how they establish a base and how they create a coalition of folks that are going to push a more conservative message. And if we're asleep at the wheel, we're going to lose that race. And so I encourage you to be a leader in this field. Talk to not just Orange County Democrats, but other respective parties as you continue to do the work of C2C. Also talk to them about this issue, because I think the faster we can mobilize in our respective communities, the better for a better North Carolina. So really appreciate y'all's time tonight, and happy to answer questions and comments, but I'll probably just direct you back to Eliezer. So thanks so much.
We're going to turn it over to Eliezer. I just want to pick up on one thing that you said, which is how do we take the message that came out of tonight and capture them, not just certainly for broader audience within C2C, but also in other some affiliated organizations and others that we know that are in the same thing. I mean, it was just, I thought the three of you, from your different insights and perspectives, have brought so much better understanding that it needs to be shared. We need to think about how to share that better.
Absolutely.
Eliezer, this is your time to moderate. Thank you.
Well, Kay, you did amazing. Thank you so much. Of course, Jennifer or Dr. J and Ricky, thank you for your amazing presentations. I'm honored to be a part of a panel with y'all. But yes, so now we get into the part of question and answers and really having conversations with folks. And this is where I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to either ask your question or be part of the conversation, because as Ricky said, these conversations need to be ongoing. They need to be interactive. They need to be with more than just a couple of people. So I want to hear from all of y'all. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. If you want to ask it live, raise your hand. We'll get to you as soon as we can. And to kick off the question and answer portion of this conversation, I believe, Jennifer, you have a question for Ricky and I. So I'll let you do that first.
Okay, well, it's a simple question, and it is, well, it's sort of simple. In addition to the issue of recognizing that immigration is not numero uno in terms of the issues, what do you think are other things that people don't get about the Latino population, or misconceptions where they get it wrong? Yeah. That you should want to like give them a chance to get the straight scoop from you guys.
Well, I'll get this one started, then I'll kick it over to Ricky. First and foremost, I think, Jennifer, you said this before, but Spanish is important, but it should not be a limitation to reaching out to Latino communities. The Latino community overall, the voting Latino community overall in North Carolina is fairly young. We're talking about a very young population of voters, primarily for the most part, between the ages of 18 and 35. Most of them have English as their first language or have learned English at a very young age. And we're talking, there's like a very clear generational divide when it comes down to who you need to be speaking Spanish to and who you don't, right? When you're talking about parents over the age of, I would say between 45 and 50, let's go with someone who's bilingual and kind of have that conversation, and Spanish will more likely be part of the conversation, or how you have the whole conversation. But under that low threshold, the majority of folks speak English, so don't be afraid to reach out. That's one of the bigger misconceptions that I've seen with folks, that they think just because you're Latino, Spanish is going to be your primary language. It's not, specifically not when we're talking about Latino voters. So we're talking about immigrants that are Latinos. Okay, maybe you have a point there, right? But when we're talking about voters, as we're reaching out, as doing calls, as we're doing canvassing, let's err on the side of giving folks the ability to speak to speak in the language you understand before you automatically assume that they don't speak English. Being someone who at the grocery store, many times folks have automatically spoke Spanish to me, even though they're not Latino, simply because they believe that I won't speak English. That's insulting. Let's not insult all voters. But keeping in mind that still having some folks who can't speak in Spanish in order, or in case that's the need, is very important. So bilingual outreach is extremely important. Still putting out things in Spanish is how we get younger people to vote, right? Because we get the parents who don't speak English, who are very much in tune with Spanish, pushing their kids to go out. So I'll pause there and pass it over to Ricky for that.
Yeah, great point, Eliasad. And I'll add that, similar to what I was saying about immigration as a value, I think language access as a value, I think signals to voters that we care about them and that we're interested in having a real conversation. So many of my walk cards, when we do some of these canvases, they're Spanish on one side and English on the other, because oftentimes you're hitting younger Latino voters that probably read and comprehend English better, but their parents may also be in the household, right? That may also be voters or just interested in what's going on, right? Because if they can't vote, they have a whole community that can, and engagement looks different than just voting. And so, talking at the hair salon or the barbershop or at work, like, oh, have you heard of so-and-so, he's running for office? Like, those conversations happen just as they do in all of our communities. And so, people talk about the commercials, the ads, and who's running for office, and recognize the name as well. And so certainly an important part of outreach. To answer your question, though, I think that the underscoring something, Dr. J, that you shared in your slides, which was the diversity in the community. There's honestly there's no such thing as a Latino vote, right? The Latino community is not a monolith. It is incredibly diverse. There is a lot short of a large Mexican community in North Carolina, more than the majority. That is absolutely true. But at the same time, there's intergenerational differences, right? Like, what does it mean to be a Mexican American who's grown up in North Carolina versus someone who's immigrated here? And then the whole other 40% of folks who may come from a different country of origin. And so that is one of the biggest misconceptions, and something that folks struggle with, I believe, a lot, that there's a lot of cultural nuance to all of this, and how you approach and talk to voters. The more you know, like, the better informed you are when you're having these conversations around history and context. For example, you were sharing, right, just around how political participation may be a little dicey in Central American countries. That's certainly the case from El Salvador, where my parents are from, and what that's meant over the years with, surviving a civil war and things of that nature. But, other people also may expect different types of participation. And so when we canvassed in 2020, we actually took sort of like a caravan of cars and went through Latino neighborhoods, and sort of just like, it was more of a celebratory feel. And you see a lot of that in countries like Mexico, right? Where, like, how people vote looks different. People literally get on buses and go together, right? Like, it's a celebration, and people celebrate things of that nature. And so that's one of the biggest things that I've gotten from some voters, where people say the political process is so disengaged here. People don't care. And, like, you don't make a big deal about it, right? Like, everyone goes together to vote. They go on parades, they go on cars, and it's like a big thing to celebrate, right? And so there's also a lot of confusion as to why, if it's so important, why don't we act like it, right? And so I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that I've seen as well.
And I do want to mention one thing. So I grew up in the border. I grew up in the Rio Grande Valley. If you don't know where that is, like South Texas, North Mexico. We would go over to visit my family because half of them is on the Texas side, the other half on the Mexican side. And we would go over to Mexico and visit my grandmother. And during election cycles, it was hard not to hear a car that had as subwoofer in the top of the roof with these recordings of "Vota por quien sabe quién," go out to vote, like things like that. It was, and I'm glad that Ricky brought that up because it's so celebratory, and that's part of, you know, as we're moving forward in this outreach and this work, we have to acknowledge that, you know, voting is not just a right, it's not just a responsibility, it's a huge privilege. It's a huge celebratory thing that we have to put up in importance. It's not simply every other 4 years or whatever, but it's like every time we have an election, whether it's local, whether it's municipal, county, state, or federal, we need to make a party out of it. And I'll definitely do that because I love parties. But anyway, we're not talking about me. We are, let's get into some of the questions from the audience. First, before we go into folks who have their hands raised, Jane asks if there are any new Latino candidates in this election. I know for sure there's me, but I'm for local. I'm running for our special election here at Scarborough. But Ricky, or Dr. I want to keep calling you Dr. J. Sorry, Dr. J. Do you know any Latino candidates out there today?
Or Maryland.
Yeah, I know one. There is another House candidate running. There's a Democratic primary, so this is not an endorsement, but in the Forsyth County area, Carla Day, who's running to be the Democratic nominee against Sean Liu out in sort of Western Forsyth County. There's also on the local level, there is Emily Chavez, who's running for school board, District 6, I believe. I may have completely made up the district, but in Durham County, who's running for maybe an open seat. I believe the incumbent may have withdrawn, but that's all I know about that race. But yeah, check out Emily Chavez. She's a friend. She's fantastic. If you live in Durham, I don't know anything about the dynamics of the race. I don't know any of the other candidates. This is an endorsement of her as a person. I don't know about the race. And that may be all I know off the top of my head, but other folks may know, as I've learned quickly that when you're in the legislature, you lose track of about 98 of the counties. And so I'm pretty laser focused on Alamance these days, but I wonder if other folks know of other candidates.
I thought I heard some chatter that there were Republican Latinos.
There is. I'm trying to find his name.
There's actually one in Orange County, lives on the Orange County side of Mebane, who's running in the Republican side of HD50, which I guess the primary there is Matt Hughes and Renee Price, and then Charles Lopez is running, who just ran for city council here in Mebane, and was pretty conservative and radical in some of his beliefs around a number of things.
Yeah. So which again highlights the fact that Latinos are not a monolith. You don't have the Latino vote already secured because we have some Latino Republicans who are running in the elections, and I'm all for supporting Latinos except the Republicans. Anyway, let's go with folks who have their hands raised. We'll go with Joy and then Caleb.
Okay, I want to share a quick experience I had with my first canvass for Ricky when he was running in 2020. And it sort of relates to the comment that I'll call you Dr. J made about Latino voters need more support to mobilize and engage. So anyway, here's what happened. Some of you may have heard this story. So knocking on Democratic doors, talk to this Latino woman. We were trying to tell him why Ricky was the best thing since sliced bread, and we were giving him his message. And so she was going to vote. And then I asked her, and what we were meant to ask everybody, would you like to get involved in Ricky's campaign? And I gave her some choices, and she hesitated. And she had tears in her eyes. And she says, no one has ever asked me to get involved. And so, whoa. So I think it is important that we ask people to get engaged. But I have a question for you, Dr. J, on your slide when you were talking about challenges. Messaging. how do we handle when this issue is brought up from the person messaging around conservative values, specifically abortion? And I think the Republicans will try to make these wedge issues. So I really need, I'm going to need some guidance on, for the conservative values, how we handle that. So can you dive any further into this, or?
I mean, my feeling would be that unless abortion is brought up by the other person, you can't deflect it. I would really, Democrats have some conservative values too. I mean, we're also in favor of hard work and people having jobs and people being self-reliant and coming together as a community. There are things that we can point to, on the policy side that promoting investment and that's job creating, and a variety of things like that sort of bridge over that, and not to attack the values, but to show how Democrats are not just narrowly focused on sort of the things that they might think of. That there's a lot of openness and a lot of emphasis to on these things that are also associated with conservatives as well as people on the Dem side.
Thank you, Joy, for that question, and Doc for answering that. And it's funny because I see that Ricky put in the chat that you should start a podcast. I fully endorse the podcast. But anyway, let's go with Caleb. You put a question in the chat, but if you want to come off mute.
I just figured I'd come off mute, and I'm thanks for the presentations. I'm lucky to call Ricky a colleague, a fellow representative in the State House. I'm newly appointed in District 114, and have really been, following Ricky's. Yeah, exactly, Dr. J. That would be Buncombe County. Sorry, not everybody knows all the numbers of the districts. Western North Carolina, Asheville, and we have, I think it's 8% Latinx in my community. So really trying to think strategically about, how we can reach out to these folks, and y'all's input has been really excellent. Well, curious about, kind of similar to Joy's question, considering some of the kind of more of our conservative economic values of parts of the Latinx community, what do you think are the kind of key points to hit about the democratic economic platform that you think connect with the Latin or Latino community?
Well, I mean, I haven't myself seen any survey data really, on that, but I mean, I think I don't know that it's that different from what you would hit with other people. Like, people are concerned about, having jobs, about their kids being able to get ahead, getting the right skills. And I mean, I would talk about how the social services and also the access to healthcare, because lack of healthcare is a major issue in terms of people keeping their livelihood together, people having to stay home to take care of sick kids, or they can't get healthcare to be able to stay at work themselves, or whatever it is. I mean, they're really understanding the whole person, and that many of these things, even if it's presenting as a social service, it also is very important for the economy. And the need, for example, Medicaid expansion. One of the things that people don't realize is that if you're not a citizen, you can't get you're limited in what you can get by way of government-funded healthcare. So many people who have aging parents, that's going to be a concern. How are they going to cover these costs? So emphasizing, that sort of whole gamut of how health affects people's livelihoods and their ability for the family to get ahead, and how we have to meet those things. So to help people, I think that, but I'm not a pollster, so I'm not going to, someone else may have a better take on that.
Yeah, I'll quickly respond. And I love the workshop with you as well, Caleb. But I think the sort of message around economic populism has really picked up steam, especially with COVID, given, I mean, I think of the folks in my community, I think of people like my parents and other people who, I don't want to say were abused, right? But certainly were disrespected in the way that their labor rights were sort of handled and continued to be handled even before COVID, right? But they really are seen as labor, right? And they very much know that and talk about it. And I think being able to acknowledge the dignity and fairness that needs to come with hard work, right? Like essentially this really strong belief, right, that like if you work hard and play by the rules, like you deserve to prosper. And I think really drilling down on that message is really, really important for folks because that's their life, right? I mean, they go put in like, 9 to 5, 2 shifts maybe, and to sort of not see the fruits of their labor. I think to be able to point out why I think is really important in this moment.
Yeah, and so I know that we are a little bit over time, so I want to just, if y'all will indulge me, just a quick closing comments by all of our speakers tonight. Just what is your one takeaway? Aside from everybody volunteer, there's been multiple links in the chat. Make sure that you volunteer for CDC, county to county. So let's final comments. We'll go with Jennifer. And then Ricky.
Well, I mean, I would say, I mean, that maybe a different take on the value of canvassing. I mean, canvassing is really educational. You go out and talk to people who you might not meet in your daily Chapel Hill, privileged life, and you have sometimes very interesting conversations, even on the phone. Sometimes less than canvassing, you get much better conversations, and it really, you can learn a lot from, I mean, this is not specifically with regard to Latinos or not, but I mean, having worked internationally for decades, one of the things that I say is that uneducated does not mean stupid.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of very smart, perceptive, thoughtful people out there, who don't have much education. And it's very interesting to talk to them and see their perspective and learn things that you didn't know. Like, for example, I was having a comment, sort of long answer, but I think it was really an important conversation with a woman who lives in a trailer in someplace in Pitt County, an older woman, a lot of health problems, large family, and she's just like struggling to keep this whole thing together, and the fact that there are developers coming out and buying up the trailer parks. And that after a 3-year delay, they can redevelop those, and vast numbers of people will be out of homes. And we have, as far as I know, like very little in the way of low-cost housing options here. So that was that was an issue that she was very concerned about, and rightly so. And so it's not just a one-way street where you're giving them the information about how to vote and informing these poor benighted people. They actually, you have a lot of interesting conversations with folks.
Mm-hmm. Ricky.
Yeah, I would say that for anyone that in March of 2022 that is still hanging their head about what a tough election this is going to be, that we need y'all to get up and go canvass. Canvass has always been our secret weapon, and we didn't have that in 2020, and we saw what that meant for elections that should have turned out really different. And I believe that shows you the power of relationships and building trust in an age of dis and misinformation, where Latino voters in particular, we didn't talk about this, but getting bombarded by misinformation in Spanish and not having the same sort of tools that we see in reporting around that. And so the only way to cut through all that noise is for us to meet them where they are at the doors and have these conversations. And so I think that keeping that in mind is critically important in a year where the game is a turnout game, and making sure that we're talking to these voters is critically important. At the end of the day, right? Like, we're in a time where solutions are hard to come by. We're facing really complex problems. Most of the time I see that voters are looking for someone who will have their back, and we need to make sure that we're at their door and letting them know we have your back. And I think that'll go a long way in this election. So click on that link, sign up, and I'll see you out in these Alamance neighborhoods.
Yeah, and I will just finish off by saying first, thank you to everyone who came and were part of this conversation. As y'all may have noticed, it's just the beginning of an extremely long and complex conversation that we cannot do within the confines of the Zoom. But please continue to be engaged. please reach out to any of our panelists. Well, I'll volunteer myself, and I'm going to volunteer the other two to reach out and let us know any questions you have, any conversations you want to have, because at the end of the day, we need to knock on every door. We need to get every single Latino voter to the voting polls, and we need to make sure that not only do we win elections, but we make North Carolina blue. And ultimately, that's the mission. So volunteer, talk to your neighbors, volunteer your neighbors, get your kids, your cousins, your nephews, the kids you tutor at school, get all of them to volunteer and make sure that we're really creating a democracy for all. So Kay, I'll leave it with you, and I would say thank you to everyone who showed up and were part of this conversation.
We couldn't do a better pitch for the volunteers. I just want to say just a couple of things, adding my thanks, obviously, to just a very rich and interesting discussion. One specific set of volunteers we are looking for now. We are about to set up the Latino leadership team for 2022. It will build on a lot of lessons that we learned in 2020, some of which Ricky just referred to about when we stopped canvassing. But that's a really important group. It's going to set the strategy. It's going to be drawing on all the information that we got tonight and trying to sort out how do we slice and dice between enormous number of issues of diversity, of where do we target, who do we target, what are the messages, and then what do we do and how well are we doing? And we need some people to come and help us set this strategy and advise us, look at what's working, what's not working, making sure that we have people to do what needs to be done if we're going to reach in a much better way the Latino communities in our partner counties. The second thing I want to mention, which is relevant to the whole discussion on canvassing, and that is that we are currently raising money to run our first, at least a test program on paid canvassing in 5 or 6 counties in North Carolina. We're very excited about it. The people who will be doing the canvassing will be from the communities themselves. And so we'll have a cadre of people who really do understand local issues and can provide the kind of messaging and listening that we need and our candidates need. And so we're extremely excited about that. And that will also be with the Latino outreach team. So I hope that is a tantalizing offer that you join this group. I think it'll be very exciting. And obviously, to just reemphasize what Eleazar said so well, we really, really need volunteers right now. We cannot just wait until it's time to get out the vote. Now we're setting, if we're ever going to hit people once, twice, and 3 times, we're certainly not going to do it in September and October. So all of that, laying the foundation, finding how best to work on everything we do, from phone banking to canvassing, voter registration, strategic information, all of that, all of our work needs additional resources. So please think about people who are interested, who speak Spanish, but also, as Elio said, who don't. That's my great hope in life, and I'm starting to learn slowly. Please think about people who can be part of this effort. We think it's a very exciting one, and we hope you'll join it. Huge thanks to the discussion tonight. Really, really rich. And fortunately, we've recorded it. So thank you, thank you.
Muchas gracias a todos. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. Till next time.